Less than 6 hours is the latest episode of Under the Skin. 9:30 tonight, John Perlman is talking to UDM leader General Bantu Holomisa, who you might remember recently tried his hand at news anchoring on As It Happens. So let's take a listen now to part of tonight's interview where John asks the General about his party's chances at the polls in next year's elections.
With limited numbers which we have shaped the politics of this country. We have batted well. We are still occupying the crease when it comes to anti-corruption, fighting corruption. So we are satisfied that come next year, UDM will be rewarded. You were here when we led the campaign against Zuma. You were here when we put coalitions together. You were here when we chased the chairperson of IEC, Pensitlagula. So it's time for us to be rewarded.
It's time for you to be rewarded, but you do know the fickleness of the electorate. In the beginning, you were something new, and people came out to vote you for it. How do you think the changes in the African National Congress, the departure of Jacob Zuma, the presidency now, both of the party and the country, of Cyril Ramaphosa, how does that change the lie of the land for you?
Well, the changes within the ANC is too early to expect that you will gain something.
Yes. Because
the followers of political parties, sometimes they are like those of football, Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates. If a team is not doing well, they don't go to the stadium.
So once a pirate, always a pirate.
Yes.
Once a UDM, always a UDM.
Yes.
Is that how it works?
So what I'm expecting is that we need to look at the 48% of the population which has not been participating in elections, and also to the new entrance, that is the youth of which will be qualified to vote. So those are the areas we are targeting. We are not interested in wasting our time in recruiting ANC members. Let us focus and introduce ourselves to the population of South Africa. ANC has only got a membership of about 1 million, if I'm not mistaken. But we have 52 million population.
Yes.
That's what we should be targeting.
Okay.
Leave ANC alone. Go and say to the people of South Africa, invest in me, this is what I've done.
Well, that's just part of the interview that is going to be on the full episode of Under the Skin with John Perlman this evening. John, hello to you. You're joining us from our Hyde Park studios. So less than 6 hours to go. So the General acknowledging a limited number as far as membership's concerned, but he says the UDM is worth investing in. Were you impressed with his anti-corruption drive? All right, seems not quite getting through to John Perlman, but there's plenty more where that interview came from with the General Bantu Holomisa. John Perlman has that show for you this evening, as he does every Wednesday, Under the Skin, a full sit-down interview with the leader of the UDM on ENCA. All right, let's take you to a piece of international news that we've been following, and it's turning into something of a tragedy now, really. And the search for rescue workers in Guatemala is continuing. This after this devastating volcanic eruption. We've now been told that more than 70 people have lost their lives.
A new explosion at the Fuego volcano saw emergency services order more evacuations from surrounding areas. Authorities say the new eruption will likely result in more deaths. Fuego, which means fire in Spanish, began erupting on Sunday. Rescue workers have been combing the surrounding areas, searching for survivors and bodies.
We came to help with the search for people because one is my daughter who hasn't turned up. So we came to see if we could rescue her or at least find her cavada so that we can have her.
Others were more lucky. A video shared by the Guatemala National Police showed a baby girl being rescued from a house in the affected area. Forecasters are predicting more rain, which will complicate rescue efforts in the coming days. The problem is the coat of ash that is covering everything will harden when wet. Fuego is one of several active volcanoes in the Central American country. The latest activity is mostly on the far side of the volcano, facing the Pacific coast. The area has survived several volcanic eruptions in recent times.
It certainly is becoming a global catastrophe. Let's go back now to John Perlman, host of Under the Skin. Hello to you, John. My apologies for a little bit earlier. We just heard that soundbite out of your show this evening, 9:30. You're sitting down with UDM leader General Bantu Holomisa. He was talking about the numbers that they have and what they're hoping to get in next year's elections. Were you impressed with his anti-corruption rhetoric and that drive of the UDM?
Yes, hi Gareth and hi everyone. Look, I think the record does speak for itself. The UDM has fought hard on this issue and they've indeed done some pretty decisive things. The big question I think for me is the ground has changed with President Jacob Zuma no longer being President Jacob Zuma. You have Cyril Ramaphosa in his stead. It doesn't mean that the ANC is out of the woods in terms of credibility around corruption. But I think the UDM is going to have to come up with some other things, other than saying we're a thorn in the side of the ruling party. Many people will say, that's great, please continue to do that. Do we want you to be the ruling party? I think that's another matter. But he certainly fights his corner, as he has for many, many decades, and he had some interesting things to say. The one thing I asked him about, which I found really interesting, and I think people will look forward to hearing about tonight, was I said, without Bantu Holomisa, how much of a UDM is there really? Can anyone name the other 5 MPs, would be another way of putting that question. He gives a very interesting answer.
It is a very, very interesting question, John. I don't want to give too much away. I don't like doing spoiler alerts, but later in the interview, I know he talks about the coalition with the DA down in Port Elizabeth. Do you get the sense that he's a man that's comfortable with compromises in coalition politics?
Yes, I think so, because I think he sees himself, Gareth, as somebody who has always worked within the kind of cut and thrust of politics. Some of that is being tough, which he can do. He's also quite good at mediating and talking things through. He's described himself as an uncle, that he's an uncle both to Julius Malema and to Mmusi Maimane when those parties are talking, and obviously the UDM is yet another player in those coalition politics, that he plays that role. He listens, he advises, he guides as the older man that he is. I think they're very unhappy with the DA in Port Elizabeth because they feel that the DA accused their leadership in that city of doing certain things which they feel they've never demonstrated or proved. But I don't think he's ruling it out. He's a canny politician with a view to the long term. But yes, he certainly will hold the DA's feet to the fire and expect to be treated with great respect, him and his party, however many votes they bring to the table.
Yeah, and those elections coming up next year as well, so many people are going to watch those tables and the numbers they bring to them closer, John Perlman, as we build up to that. Now, I know that the General is a fascinating character to interview. We had a chance to interact when he was busy preparing for his stint on As It Happens. He tried this job, news anchoring, and he was a lovely man to speak to, full of surprises.
Yes.
The short interaction I had with him. Did you pick up anything surprising in your interaction with him?
Well, what I found really interesting as well, and that's in the show tonight too, was his comments on traditional rulers and land, because he comes from a deeply rural background, and indeed his background is as the son of a chief. He is, in that sense, royalty. So a couple of questions that I asked him I think people will find interesting the answers to. The one is, does he believe in a democratic society you should have hierarchies like that are based on birth and lineage and history? But also I asked him how that relates to the land question. And again, his answer is very carefully phrased. He's very clear to say that traditional leaders have a role to play. But he's also very clear as to what that role should be. And he frames it quite precisely. They're not owners of the land. They are people responsible and in charge of making sure that the land allocation is fair. Two very different things.
All right, John Perlman, I think lining it up perfectly what is going to be a fascinating edition of Under the Skin this evening as well. So when you get home, put the children to bed early, get your dinner done early, and 9:30 tonight, make sure you're on DSTV 403 ENCA as my colleague there, John Perlman, sits down with the leader of the UDM, that being General Bantu Holomisa.